In the North Sea darkness of April 1940, Germany gathered its steel and will to reshape Scandinavia's fate. The invasion, Operation Weserübung, showed Hitler's new vision. Norway, a nation of forests and bitter coasts, would become a fortress for the Reich. "We need the iron ore, the ports and the skies," thundered General Jodl. "Norway is the front line of our empire." In Oslo, politicians awoke to sirens and the grind of distant engines. The Luftwaffe struck first. Airborne paratroops seized Fornebu and Stavanger, and then spread out seeking sites for secret expansion. Amid the panic, engineers saw opportunity. Norway's wild coast would hide bases critical for protecting Arctic convoys, attacking Allied shipping and staging northern air campaigns. Banak Airfield, a sandy loam plain near Lakselv, became one such secret stronghold. The Luftwaffe's planners arrived in the shadow of the midnight sun. Norwegian crews watched as German construction battalions turned old fields and moorland into a new web of wooden runways, fuel depots, and radar outposts. "They took our silence and filled it with engines," said Norwegian farmer Per Lund. "Every day, more huts. Every night, more noise." Low over the Porsanger Fjord, Heinkel torpedo bombers practiced runs in bitter wind. Messerschmitt Bf-109s patrolled the Arctic sky, hunting British and Soviet planes. The Banak base grew fast. By late 1940, two planked runways stretched out into the moss, and barracks for hundreds of troops rose out of the dirt. Trucks arrived loaded with radar gear, weather stations, and mountains of fuel barrels, each marked with black Luftwaffe crosses. Lista, Bardufoss, Herdla, other Norwegian sites awakened to the same secret rhythm. German officers kept their men on strict orders, especially as Arctic winter set in. Frostbite threatened every guard post, radio mast iced over, fog never lifted before noon. Yet Banak became infamous among both friend and foe, a place where missions began that never made news. As 1941 turned, the base camouflaged itself with nets and birch branches, hoping to deceive British reconnaissance. Each morning, Norwegian laborers, paid but watched, repaired what the night's cold had broken. At sunset, Banak's airstrip glowed barely visible in the perpetual twilight, the scene now poised between routine and threat. One Luftwaffe mechanic, Emil Rakoff, later recalled, "You saw only ice and darkness. We worked in shifts, 2 hours on, 2 off. Our hands never stopped shaking." Germans knew they were far from home, and that Norway's landscape could be as brutal as any enemy. For the men stationed at Banak, every day was a test of resolve and secrecy. The base's wooden runways stretched over frozen tundra, built for bomber wings tasked with a singular, relentless command: attack the Allied Arctic convoys. The cold dictated life. Ice clogged even the simplest engines, and the auroras above flickered like warnings in the endless night. Banak's main mission was strategic and brutal. From here, Luftwaffe torpedo bombers and long-range reconnaissance aircraft launched into the Arctic gloom, searching for merchant ships bound for Murmansk. The base became the heartbeat of northern operations, where missions were planned in barracks, crowded with maps, weather charts, and fuel drums stacked against the walls. "Every ship that passed the North Cape was ours to hunt," remembered a navigator, Rolf Weber. But the weather, more than the Allies, was our enemy. Between sorties, Norwegian labor crews shuttled supplies, repaired runways, and built hangars while under constant surveillance. Sparse food and harsh workdays were interrupted by German commands barked in clipped, cold accents. Some Norwegians sabotaged tools when they could. "We did small things, left screws missing, poured water in the gasoline," said local worker Lars Amat. The Germans pretended not to notice. They needed every hand. By 1943, Banak had 2 parallel runways nearly 2 kilometers long, enough to house entire squadrons of bombers, torpedo planes, and scouts ready for the next convoy raid. Each takeoff and loss was marked quietly in the operations tent. Some missions returned with planes shot full of holes or lost to the sea. Each time, the wind and snow erased the evidence by morning. Even the structure of Banak itself felt temporary. Barracks built on blocks, sheds stacked with spare aircraft parts, wooden guards, towers silhouetted against the eerie blue glow of an Arctic summer night. Radar installations scanned the skies for British raids, while cryptic radio bursts kept Banak's schedule in step with Berlin. Life on base was a mix of anxiety and repetition. For German pilots, the isolation gnawed at morale. "We wrote home about the cold and the silence. noted flight engineer Fritz Sommer. Sometimes the aurora was so bright it felt like the sky was burning. We thought only the Russians were mad enough to attack in this hell. The Reich's focus on secrecy was paramount. Orders were precise. Allied intelligence knew Banak existed, but not its full capacity. Air photos missed hangars masked with birch screens, and frequent relocations of units kept the Allies uncertain. Saboteurs attempted to disrupt operations, but the harsh climate was the base's best protection. Still, fear of Soviet retaliation haunted the base. As Germany prepared for the invasion of Russia, Banak became more vital, serving as a springboard for missions against Murmansk, Arkhangelsk, and other northern targets. Finnish liaison officers arrived, exchanging information about Soviet movements. Mechanics worked round the clock, patching planes for the next strike, sometimes cannibalizing older wrecks whose aluminum skins had splintered in below-zero nights. Among Norwegian civilians, stories of Banak spread like shadows. Rumors of weapon stockpiles, lost Allied spies, enormous fuel depots rumored to be secretly buried in the hills. One man, Ole Richard Nilsson, later described the scene. We saw the flame from their engine tests light the fjord, and at night the guards sang songs from Munich. As the war ground into 1944, Banak's fate became tied to the larger unraveling of Germany's northern ambitions. Allied Arctic convoys increased, and British bombers occasionally struck the base with high-explosive raids. Each attack left splintered wood and burning fuel, but Banak persisted, rebuilt again and again under the constant threat of Soviet advance. In haunted correspondence, Luftwaffe officers wrote of Banak's eerie endurance. One captain, Hans Kruger, described it as a place waiting for its own disappearance. Norwegian villagers, meanwhile, watched silently as entire squadrons vanished in a single night by Allied guns, only to be replaced within days. But all secrets in wartime have their limits. By October 1944, as Germany began its Operation Nordlicht retreat from Finnmark, Banak was rigged for demolition. Engines ran with no destination, and piles of documents were burned in open pits. The final days saw frantic radio transmissions, bomb loads jettisoned into the fjord, and a strange, cold quiet as the Luftwaffe prepared to disappear. Norwegian witnesses remember the silence. On the last day, there were no orders, just faces clenched with fear. They set fire to the hangars and vanished into the hills, recalled Sigrid Johansson. The base lay shattered until the end of the war, marking the coastline with scars that would take decades to fade. Autumn of 1944 struck Banak with a final agony. As German forces retreated during Operation Nordlicht, orders arrived to destroy the base before Soviet troops could seize its secrets. Pillars of smoke rose over Finnmark. Wooden hangars, fuel depots, and radio towers were blasted, leaving scorched wreckage shrouded in Arctic mist. For Norwegian villagers, the sudden withdrawal was both liberation and uncertainty. We could hear explosions all night, remembered Ole Richard Nilsson. Come morning, the Germans were gone, but the base looked as if winter itself had bombed it. In the silence that followed, Banak's ruins became a playground for local children and a reminder of what power leaves behind. After the guns stopped, Banak stood empty. Splinters of runway jutting over grass, a few charred trucks abandoned beside the fjord. In May 1945, the Royal Norwegian Air Force took control, piecing together the fragments of war for the new era. The first flights carried wounded and supplies to the east, linking Bardufoss to Kirkenes. For one brief season, Banak offered hope where for years it had only sent war. In the late 1940s, Norway's needs shifted. The remnants of Banak's wooden runways were lifted for other construction projects. Locals scavenged metal for roofs, machines for farms. The landscape began to reclaim scars, but not the memory. Soviet expansion grew threatening, and Finnmark's cold border edged closer to the front lines of a new conflict. The airbase had become more than a ruin. It was a symbol. The era of occupation had left secrets beneath thawing ground. Buried munitions, twisted radio equipment, faded Luftwaffe insignia. Old men warned that Banak has its ghosts, while children found rivets in melting snow. Some families planted their fields just outside the airport's shadow, hoping that every year the past would become just a little less vivid. Interest in Banak reignited during the Cold War. The Czechoslovak coup of 1948 and fears of Soviet intervention made Finnmark, Norway's frontier with Russia, a crucial chessboard for NATO strategy. Military planners saw Banak as a tripwire. In case of invasion, its runways could serve as a final stand or a sacrificial delay. But for years, it remained mostly unused. A grass strip and some abandoned wooden planks occasionally hosting small planes or air ambulances. In 1955, NATO weighed funding its reconstruction, with debates over the best location for air defense against Soviet incursions. The government finally approved Banak's redevelopment in 1959, the start of its new life as a bulwark of Arctic patrol and a node in the Cold War's northern vigilance. Construction crews expanded the runways, added hangars and communications buildings, and laid out roads among birch and moss. The base became home once more to aircraft, but now under Norwegian, not German, insignia. For Finnmark residents, Banak was both a shield and a reminder. Garrison numbers swelled, military exercises churned up old grounds, and radar posts swept the polar sky for anything moving fast and silent. Yet every winter, stories returned of the torpedo bombers lost in the fjords, the German mechanics who cursed the cold, the villagers who sabotaged tanks with a whisper and a wrench. As Norway entered the second half of the 20th century, Banak outlived its secrets and became a place of transition. The airport hosted civilian flights, air ambulances, search and rescue missions, life's rhythms replacing the old drumbeat of war. Yet even today, beneath the tarmac and snow, the stones echo with memory. Some say that on frost-bitten autumn mornings, the aurora lights Banak's runways with an eerie glow, and in the silence, you can still sense the legacy of a base built for secrecy and lost to time. Banak is where the war lasted for years after it ended, says Lars Amat, retired airman. It taught us how the present is always stitched together with the shadows of old battles. As the last bombs fell silent and the wooden runways at Banak began their slow return to nature, Norway faced a future shadowed but not broken by war. Local families, awakened by haunted dreams, rebuilt lives around the scarred land that once roared with German engines and the midnight glow of northern missions. For years after liberation, Banak remained partly abandoned, its splintered timbers and rusted fuel drums reminders of occupation and resistance. In the 1950s, with the dawn of Cold War fears, Finnmark's vast plains again drew the eyes of military planners. The border moved in our minds. Even after the Germans left, said schoolteacher Ingrid Felt, we measured safety by the distance from Banak. Debate raged over Banak's future. Would the northern air station be a shield or a liability in new wars? Norwegian parliamentarians weighed security against community need, struggling with memories of forced labor and silent defiance. NATO funds rebuilt the base, new runways extended again in the 1960s, and radar towers swept the sky for echoes of old and new adversaries. The Royal Norwegian Air Force stationed sea rescue helicopters, transforming the former base of bombers into a haven for Arctic emergencies. Each decade left a new mark. Cold War exercises churned up fields and forests once quiet beneath snow. Banak saw civilian flights mix with military drills. Rescue helicopters share hangars with jet fighters. The airfield became the region's lifeline, connecting scattered communities to Oslo, to Europe, to distant hopes. In Lakselv, Banak's legacy sat in quiet conversation. Old villagers told tales of German torpedo planes roaring at dawn, Allied bombers strafing the fjord, and Norwegian mechanics planting resistance in every lost bolt. Local museums display fragments, twisted propellers, weathered wooden planks, Norwegian and Luftwaffe uniforms faded in Arctic light. Every May, on anniversary days, residents gather at the airstrip to remember not only the battles, but the unrecorded moments. The saboteurs who saved a tractor by miswiring parts, the German mechanic who shared ration soup with a Norwegian boy, the pilots who vanished into fog without a word. These stories rest in living memory, spoken quietly as the wind rolls over old buildings and summer lights paint the horizon gold. For Norway, Banak is more than a relic. It's a marker of how war transforms both land and spirit. From Axis stronghold to rescue lifeline, from secret base to community hub, its history holds lessons about resilience and adaptation. Some say the true secret of Banak is not what was hidden in bunkers, but what endures in the dignity of those who rebuild. Banak taught us to expect change, said longtime airfield caretaker Olav Sveen. It was built to hide war, and now it brings people home. As the northern wind sweeps over the old runways, the silence that follows is not absence, but memory. History's page waiting to be turned again.